I'm Michele Booth Cole, and I serve as Executive Director of Safe Shores, the DC Children's Advocacy Center.
And you advocate on behalf of children and families that experienced abuse, correct?
Well, we actually do direct services for these families. So we conduct forensic interviews, we have therapists, we have advocates. It's a comprehensive response to allegations of child sexual abuse and physical abuse.
Okay. So one of the things I was telling you over the phone, we were looking into sex offender registries and how they work.
Yeah.
A lot of people use those as a crutch to say, all the people on them, this is my neighborhood. But what you were saying is that there may be people in your neighborhood that you don't know about due to just how the justice system works.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sex abuse or sex offender registry certainly is an important tool to have. But when I talk to my colleagues, we rarely talk about it in the work that we do, because we know that the majority of cases don't go forward for prosecution. So even where there are allegations of abuse, even where they're maybe substantiated, which means they found evidence that they happened, those cases don't go forward. And so you're only going to end up with a limited number of actual child abusers on the sex offender registry, because they're not going through the courts. And there are a number of reasons for that. Right?
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up question. I mean, why is it? Is it just naturally harder to convict them? Does data and evidence not exist? Is it intimidation? What's behind that?
Your reporter's instincts are spot on. So yeah, I mean, there are several reasons. And actually I pulled up, I mean, I know anecdotally from talking to my colleagues, we know that it's hard to prove because it's the word of a child against an adult. Often it's an adult that they have a trusting relationship with, right? That's one of the insidious things about child sexual abuse. It's someone who's in a position of trust. So either they don't want to hurt that person, they don't want to get that person in trouble, or that person has threatened them or threatened their caregivers, their mom, their family. So one, it's the word of a child against an adult. Two, sometimes, most of the time, actually, there's not evidence. Right? There's not physical evidence. I think it's as small as in 5% of the cases. And the same is true for adult sexual assault. There often isn't evidence, right? So that makes it hard to prove as well. And then if you don't have those pieces, then the reliance often is on the child's word, their forensic interview, right? And even though that is a great tool of law enforcement, it's not necessarily an easily predictable tool, right? So they're children who something has happened to, who may not be ready to disclose that day, right? So they're not going to tell what happened to them. So it's very uneven. So there are all these reasons why these cases aren't prosecuted. And then, of course, like most things, people don't want to take even if they have these elements. You have the forensic interview, you have a disclosure, maybe you have evidence. Wow, for all those things to align. That is kind of a big deal. But then, of course, if it's, prosecutors don't want to take cases to court that they're going to lose, right? Because that's hard on the victim, right? And then, of course, you just don't want to go through that exercise with the courts. When we talked, I actually did a quick research, and there's actually a really great research study. It's from 2019, and it's literally about the prosecution of child sexual abuse. And it's by two professors, one from Wellesley, one from UMass, Dr. Stephanie Block, Dr. Linda Williams, and they looked at 500 cases, right? And out of those 500 cases, only 20% went forward prosecution. And then all those, a high percentage, but not all of those did they get convictions on, right? So if you're looking at those kinds of numbers, it's not that we discount the value of a sex offender registry. Of course it has value, but we know that if 1 in 10 children are being sexually abused in the United States by the time they turn 18, right? And we know those cases aren't going forward for prosecution. There's much more risk to children in their everyday lives, right? Rather than necessarily somebody who's identified by a system as a pedophile, just because the numbers are smaller. That doesn't mean that person doesn't pose a risk. The numbers just aren't identifying as many of those offenders or perpetrators as actually exist.
One more quick question here for you, because I told you I'd keep it quick here. Do you worry that creates a chilling effect for people to come forward if they see, other people across the country haven't been able to get a conviction or
Mm,
haven't? Does that worry you that some people may
mm.
not come forward with stories?
Well, we know that child sexual abuse is an underreported crime. We know because adults tell us who were victimized as children that they didn't tell when they were children because they weren't safe, right? So, in terms of a chilling effect, what I do know is that survivors should be believed at whatever age. Survivors are incredibly strong, right? Stronger than they should have to be, often, particularly if they were harmed as children. Um, but, you know, there is an effect if people know they're not going to be believed, if they know the system is not going to work with them. That's why we have children's advocacy centers like Safe Shores, right? Because we center our work around the needs of the child, around the needs of that child survivor, right? And all the agencies that we work with are sensitive to that child in the context of the investigation, right? It's also why the CAC movement is moving away from prosecution as its standard for effectiveness and really shifting toward mental health and healing and therapy, right? Because a lot of victims, the majority, will never have their day in court, right? They're not going to be USA Gymnastics and Larry Nassar. But what they can do is if they get appropriate support and intervention, they can get access to great trauma supported mental health. They can get access to people who are going to support their caregiver, whether that's mom, grandma, aunt, dad, whomever, and them, and give them tools to move on the path to healing. Because that's what we want. We want healthy, whole, productive, functioning adults. And sadly, the criminal legal system doesn't ensure that.
Anything else you want to add that I didn't ask you?
Here's what we know can make a difference to protect children. It's having policies and protocols and practices and trainings in the places that serve children, that work with children. So schools, sports programs, after school programs. Of course, all those adults should be carefully vetted, background checks, all that. But that's just step one. The real thing is making sure that that's a safe environment for children. And the way you do that is you teach adults how to make it safe. You do stewards of children training, which is a evidence-informed training that teaches adults how to recognize, respond to, and prevent child sexual abuse. You have codes of conduct in every school that students understand, that their parents and caregivers understand, that tell children, here's what adults in this building owe you. And if you don't get it, right, you have a right to tell somebody, right? So we really need to cover the landscape with the places that children recreate, learn, worship, all those pieces, because those are the environments that predators seek out, right?
Yeah.
That's where the abuse is happening in many instances, right? And what they learn in those environments, they can take to their play groups, to hanging out with friends. All those pieces go to creating a community where we actually elevate the safety of children. And that is ultimately what's going to get us there.